Come with me, you handsome dark fellow. I'm very nice, as you will see. Do come up. At any rate, you will be able to warm yourself, for I have a capital fire at home. But nothing enticed the foot passengers, neither being called a handsome dark fellow, which she applied quite impartially to old or fat men also, nor the promise of pleasure, which was emphasized by a caressing ogle and smile, nor even the premise of a good fire, which was so attractive in the bitter December wind. And tall Fanny continued her useless walk, and the night advanced and foot passengers grew scarcer. In another hour the streets would be absolutely deserted, and unless she could manage to pick up some belated drunken men, she would be obliged to return home alone. And yet, tall Fanny was a beautiful woman, with the head of a bacchante and the body of a goddess, in all the full splendor of her 23 years. She deserved something better than this miserable pavement, where she could not even pick up 5 francs, which she wanted for the requirements of the next day. But there, in this infernal Paris, in this swarming crowd of competitors who all jostled each other, courtesans, like artists, did not attain to eminence until their later years, in that they resembled precious stones, as the most valuable of them are those that have been set the oftenest. And that is why tall Fanny, who was later to become one of the richest and most brilliant stars of Parisian gallantry, was walking about the streets on this bitter December night without a halfpenny in her pocket, in spite of the head of a bacchante and the body of a goddess, and in all the full splendor of her 23 years. However, it was too late now to hope to meet anybody. There was not a single foot passenger about. The street was decidedly empty, dull, and lifeless. Nothing was to be heard except the whistling of sudden gusts of wind, and nothing was to be seen except the flickering gas lights, which looked like dying butterflies. Well, the only thing was to return home alone. But suddenly tall Fanny saw a human form standing on the pavement at the next crossing. It seemed to be hesitating and uncertain which way to go. The figure, which was very small and slight, was wrapped in a long cloak which reached almost to the ground. "Perhaps he's a hunchback," the girl said to herself. "They like tall women." And she walked quickly towards him, from habit already saying, "Psst, psst, come home with me, you handsome dark fellow." What luck! The man did not go away, but came towards Fanny, although somewhat timidly, while she went to meet him, repeating her wheedling words so as to reassure him. She went all the quicker as she saw that he was staggering with the zigzag walk of a drunken man, and she thought to herself, "When once they sit down, there's no possibility of getting these beggars up again, for they want to go to sleep just where they are. I only hope I shall get him before he tumbles down." Luckily she reached him just in time to catch him in her arms, but as soon as she had done so, she almost let him fall. In her astonishment, it was neither a drunken man nor a hunchback, but a child of 12 or 13 in an overcoat, who was crying, and who said in a weak voice, "I beg your pardon, madam, I beg your pardon. If only you knew how hungry and cold I am. I beg your pardon. Oh, I am so cold." "Poor child," she said, putting her arms around him and kissing him. And she carried him off with full but happy heart, and while he continued to sob, she said to him mechanically, "Don't be frightened, my little man. You will see how nice I can be, and then you can warm yourself. I have a capital fire." But the fire was out. The room, however, was warm, and the child said as soon as he got in, "Oh, how comfortable it is here. It is a great deal better than in the streets, I can tell you. And I have been living in the streets for 6 days. He began to cry again and added, "I beg your pardon, madam. I have eaten nothing for 2 days." Tall Fanny opened her cupboard, which had glass doors. The middle shelf held all her linen, and the upper one there was a box of Albert biscuits, a drop of brandy at the bottom of a bottle, and a few small lumps of sugar in a cup. With that and some water out of a jug, she concocted a sort of a broth, which he swallowed ravenously. And when he had done, he wished to tell his story, which he did, yawning all the time. His grandfather, the only one of his relatives whom he had ever known, who had been a painter and a decorator at Soissons, had died about a month before. But before his death, he had said to him, "When I am gone, little man, you will find a letter to my brother, who is in business in Paris, among my papers. You must take it to him, and he will be certain to take care of you. However, in any case, you must go to Paris, for you have an aptitude for painting, and only there can you hope to become an artist." When the old man was dead, he died in the hospital, the child started, dressed in an old coat of his grandfather's and with 30 francs, which was all that the old man had left behind in his pocket. When he got to Paris, there was nobody of that name at the address mentioned on the letter. The dead man's brother had left there 6 months before. Nobody knew where he had gone to, and so the child was alone. For a few days he managed to exist on what he had over, after paying for his journey. After he had spent his last franc, he had wandered about the streets, as he had no money with which to pay for a bed, buying his bread by the halfpenny worth, until for the last 48 hours he had been without anything, absolutely without anything. He told her all this while he was half asleep, amid sobs and yawns, so that the girl did not venture to ask him any more questions, in spite of her curiosity, but, on the contrary, cut him short and undressed him while she listened, and only interrupted him with a kiss, and said to him, "There, there, my poor child, you shall tell me the rest tomorrow. You cannot go on now, so go to bed and have a good sleep." And as soon as he finished, she put him to bed, where he immediately fell into a profound sleep. Then she undressed herself quickly, got into bed by his side, so that she might keep him warm, and went to sleep, crying to herself, without exactly knowing why. The next day they breakfasted and dined together at a common eating-house, on money that she had borrowed, and when it was dark she said to the child, "Wait for me here, I will come for you at closing time." She came back sooner, however, about 10 o'clock. She had 12 francs, which she gave to him, telling him that she had earned them, and she continued with a laugh, "I feel that I shall make some more. I'm in luck this evening, and you have brought it to me. Do not be impatient, but have some milk posset while you are waiting for me." She kissed him, and the kind girl felt real maternal happiness as she went out. An hour later, however, she was arrested by the police for having been found in a prohibited place, and off she went, food for Saint-Lorze. And the child who was turned out by the proprietor at closing time, and then driven from the furnished lodgings the next morning, where they had told him that tall Fanny was in jail, began his wretched vagabond life in the streets again, with only the 12 francs to depend on. 15 years afterward, the newspapers announced one morning that the famous Fanny Clarier, the celebrated horizontal, whose caprices had caused a revolution in high life, that queen of frail beauties for whom 3 men had committed suicide, and so many others had ruined themselves, that incomparable living statue who had attracted all Paris to the theater where she impersonated Venus in her transparent skin tights, made of woven air and a knitted nothing, had been shut up in a lunatic asylum. She had been seized suddenly. It was an attack of general paralysis, and as her debts were enormous, when her estate had been liquidated, she would have to end her days at La Salette derrière. "No, certainly not, François Guyon," the painter said to himself, when he read the notice of it in the papers. "No, the great Fanny shall certainly not end like that." For it was certainly she, there could be no doubt about it, For a long time after she had shown him that act of charity, which he could never forget, the child had tried to see his benefactress again. But Paris is a very mysterious place, and he himself had had many adventures before he grew up to be a man, and, eventually, almost somebody. But he only found her in the distance. He had recognized her at the theater, on the stage, or as she was getting into her carriage, which was fit for a princess. And how could he approach her then? Could he remind her of the time when her price was 5 francs? No, assuredly not. And so he had followed her, thanked her, and blessed her from a distance. But now the time had come for him to pay his debt, and he paid it. Although tolerably well known as a painter with a future in store for him, he was not rich. But what did that matter? He mortgaged that future which people prophesied for him, and gave himself over, hand and foot, to a picture dealer. Then he had the poor woman taken to an excellent asylum, where she could have not only every care, but every necessary comfort and even luxury. Alas, however, general paralysis never forgives. Sometimes it releases its prey, like the cruel cat releases the mouse, for a brief moment, only to lay a hold of it again later, more fiercely than ever. Fanny had that period of abatement in her symptoms, and one morning the physician was able to say to the young man, "You are anxious to remove her? Very well, but you will soon have to bring her back, for the cure is only apparent, and her present state will only endure for a month at most, and then only if the patient is kept free from every excitement and excess." "And without that precaution?" Guerlain asked him. Then the doctor replied, "The final crisis will be all the nearer, that is all. But whether it would be nearer or more remote, it will not be the less fatal." "You are sure of that?" "Absolutely sure." Francois Guerlain took tall Fanny out of the asylum, installed her in splendid apartments, and went to live with her there. She had grown old, bloated with white hair, and sometimes wandered in her mind, and she did not recognize him, the poor little lad on whom she had taken pity in the days gone by, nor did he remind her of the circumstances. He allowed her to believe that she was adored by a rich young man who was passionately devoted to her. He was young, ardent, and caressing. Never had a mistress such a lover, and for 3 weeks before she relapsed into the horrors of madness, which were happily soon terminated by her death, she intoxicated herself with the ecstasy of his kisses, and thus bade farewell to the conscient life in an apotheosis of love. The other day at dessert, after an artist's dinner, they were speaking of Francois Guerlain, whose last picture at the Salon had been so deservedly praised. "Ah, yes," one of them said, with a contemptuous voice and a look, "that handsome fellow Guerlain." And another, accentuating the insinuation, added boldly, "Yes, that's exactly it. That handsome, too handsome fellow Guerlain, the man who allows himself to be kept by women."